Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. Oh man, where do I begin with this one? Unlike many of the other stories I've recited here, this one is no masterpiece, nor am I going to try to fool anyone into believing otherwise. Inane characters and campy acting aside, the plot of this film, despite making an attempt at the seriousness that the horror genre demands, is utterly absurd, even by 1980 standards. Having said that, however, much like what I talked about regarding Twice Upon a Time, it was this film's production history that attracted my attention, as well as its storyline, which is still interesting despite its illogical silliness. More specifically, it was that in relation to the immortal horror franchise of which it is technically a part. It is the third film, in fact, though there have been many viewers both then and now who firmly wish that this was not so. But I especially wanted to talk about this movie because of what the creators had intended. Even though those intentions failed miserably along with the movie, I give them kudos for wanting, among other things, to create something new rather than simply rehash what fans wanted. Allow me to introduce the black sheep of the Halloween franchise, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, released October 22, 1982, and rated R for violence, disturbing images, and brief nudity in language. Despite failing to stay in the good graces of his ex-wife and their children, and lighten up on the drinking, Dan Chalice's life and work as a doctor in a local hospital is more or less decent, until one night, a week before Halloween. A new patient is brought into his care, an elderly man, hysterical and barely coherent. Before blacking out, the man leaves Chalice with an ominous warning. "They're going to kill us. All of us." Just hours later, a man in a business suit walks into the hospital and assassinates the patient before committing apparent suicide himself. Deeply disturbed and guilt-ridden that such a crime occurred on his watch, Chalice teams up with the patient's daughter, Ellie, who is determined to solve the mystery behind her father's murder. Their investigation leads them to the tiny town of Santa Mira. There, they meet the generous and jovial Connell Cochran, head of Silver Shamrock, a toy and novelty company famous for its Halloween masks, which have become immensely popular among children all over America. Chalice is quick to learn, however, that behind his grandfatherly facade, Mr. Cochran has sinister plans in store for those wearing his masks on Halloween night, and Chalice must race against time to stop him before death rains down on the entire populace. I've mentioned this before, but I am not a fan of slasher flicks. And I do admit, except for some bits of number 4 and 5, this is the only film of the franchise that I've actually seen. While I don't deny the psycho serial killer concept is frightening, I don't consider that alone a sufficient enough basis for a story. I also don't religiously follow the word of professional critics. For instance, I will readily admit that I enjoyed M. Night Shyamalan's Lady in the Water in spite of the scathing negativity it still gets even today. Yes, I can see how many of the creation choices for it were indeed a mix of dumb, confusing, badly executed, and infamously egotistical on the director's part. But I did find the protagonist likable, the creatures creative, the makeup and effects solid, and the soundtrack phenomenal. But most importantly, I liked its intended message and the sincerity with which its creators tried to convey it. This is the feeling I have regarding Halloween 3. Believe it or not, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, the writers for the first 2 Halloween films, didn't want to be involved with a third unless Michael Myers was absent from it, as his story should have been officially concluded at the end of Halloween 2. Their idea for the franchise moving forward was to make it an anthology series similar to shows like The Twilight Zone. Each film, released every Halloween, would feature a different plot, but always revolve around the titular holiday. This was the first, and ultimately the only, such film to ever be made, being both a critical and financial flop. Aside from the usual complaints, plot, acting, etc., the biggest problem according to fans was, ironically, the absence of Michael Myers. In fact, Halloween 3 treats its predecessors as though they themselves are works of fiction, as bits of those films are shown on TV throughout, though it is peppered with some fun little cameos and Easter eggs for the fans, one of my favorites being this. That female voice behind the unseen phone operator and curfew announcer? None other than Jamie Lee Curtis, the original Halloween heroine herself. The fact that many people didn't like this just because there is no Michael Myers, and the subsequent and forced continuation of his story in Halloween 4 and beyond, feels especially tragic to me as it severely limited potential for creativity in this series. I mean, say what you will about Halloween 3, but at least it was original. Unfortunately, that did it no favors. The ideas used, though not terrible, do seem random at best, but combined, they feel almost slapped together, for lack of a better description. Consider these. Androids, the successful theft of a pillar of Stonehenge, yeah, the Stonehenge, and a CEO who may or may not be a witch who plans to revive the Samhain tradition by sacrificing children via killer Halloween masks. Yeah, I got nothing either. On the plus side, though, it's been rewatched and reevaluated over time, and many viewers and critics have since begun not only to appreciate its emerging cult status, but to dig deeper into the surprising intelligence very few people believed it had. The way each character views the titular holiday offers audiences some provocative commentary on the state of corporate American culture. Chalice is your typical drinking, smoking, sports-loving guy, only indulging in the holiday for his children, but otherwise finding it about as fun and relaxing as babysitting a room full of sugar-high monkeys. Ellie laments how her father, who loved children, saw his small but beloved toy shop fail due to the construction of a new mall. Marge Gutman is a disgruntled client, seemingly preferring local mom-and-pop shops over large corporations, as she believes the latter's success comes at the expense of one-on-one conversation and decent customer service. And the Kupfers, while not evil, paint an unflattering, though not totally inaccurate portrait of the American middle-class family. Buddy is an overenthusiastic salesman, naively fawning over the ever-charismatic Cochran for his success. Betty is a pampered, nagging wife, seemingly baffled by the idea of masks being so profitable. And their son, Little Buddy, epitomizes the modern-day greedy, obnoxious brat. By the way, Buddy, Betty, and Little Buddy? Seriously? Charming. But perhaps the best illustration of this trend, and what many remember most about this film, is that relentless Silver Shamrock jingle. And boy do I mean relentless. Not only is it annoyingly catchy, with its London Bridge tune, repetitive lyrics, and carnival aesthetic, but the song is played no less than 14 times over the course of the movie. 14 times! And if the idea of this hypnotizing children into screaming for televised mass-produced merchandise wasn't unsettling enough, just wait until you hear it during a highly graphic death scene, and of a child no less. Speed up the tempo just a bit, slowly raise the pitch half a step, and boom, a whole new meaning to the term earworm. And all this under the watchful eye of Cochran and his emotionless minions, with their security cameras all over the town and the TV monitors inside their fortress-like factory, in a manner reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. Here is a frighteningly direct metaphor for large companies manipulating and owning consumers, with a face just as deceptive as the masks they sell. Now everyone is more than welcome to take everything I say with a grain of salt. Maybe the later Halloween films with Myers are better made than this entry, and maybe I'm just grasping at straws as I list this movie's supposed good points. Regardless, though, I'd like to leave listeners with this thought. Just as studio intervention can spell death for a movie, fan intervention can be just as bad, if not worse. Halloween 3 is a sad example of how it might have been better to leave the creators alone and let them pursue their own ideas, rather than let their art be dictated by what fans said they wanted. As painful as it is to say, it's entirely possible for the latter to yield results more frightening than one expects, and not in a good way. Gather around next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.